What's going on YouTube? Welcome back to my channel. This is Nathan Daley. I am your 13-year law enforcement veteran. I am your law enforcement translator. So welcome to my channel for my new subscribers, you guys. We are going up in the numbers. As of today, I believe I hit 900 subscribers. So I'm extremely grateful, extremely excited. And thank you for those who are new to the channel. Listen, today is a special day. We're gonna do a breakdown on an actual law enforcement video. And this video is about accountability. So thanks to one of my subscribers. If you guys are unfamiliar with TLA, the lead attorney, he is an amazing YouTuber and he has great content. He is an attorney out here in Atlanta, a divorce attorney, well decorated, very wise. And he's sharing a lot of his wisdom on his channel. If you guys are not familiar with him, I'm gonna leave a link to his channel in the description. He definitely recommended this video. So we're gonna break this video down. I watched it already. I think it's very interesting. This video is about accountability, police accountability. And as you guys know on this channel, though I am a law enforcement advocate, I'm also an advocate for the people. I don't believe in shying away from accountability. I believe that is the most valuable thing that we can do, not just as citizens, but also those who operate within this profession. I think it is so important that we hold each other accountable, and it's okay to point out the things when we make mistakes and when we are completely wrong, right? It's important and it's imperative that we do address it so that we can learn from it. And so let's break it down and I'm gonna give you guys my perspective, all right? So before we get in the video, I'll give you a backstory. This incident happened July 26th. It happened in South Carolina. And what happened was the officers were responding to a person armed. So someone called 911 and they basically stated that, hey, there's a black male with a gun. I believe this male has a gun. Well, the officer responded on the scene, and then that's where we're gonna take it from there, and then we'll break the video down. All right, listen, you guys, I know some people prefer that they see the whole video and then I pause, but because the information that you need to know comes so quickly, I'm gonna pause, try to limit the pauses in order to kind of give you guys the most out of the video. So go ahead and play, and then I'll break it down. I'll try to keep it to a minimum. He said, who, me?
Get on the ground! Over here! On the ground! On the ground! Get on the ground! Do you not listen? Get on the ground! Get on the ground! Get on the ground! There's a gun behind me. There's a gun, I believe.
Okay, guys, let me pause here. Something that you probably couldn't recognize or probably didn't see it from this angle. I will show you a different angle from a different body cam. But what happened is Officer Dukes is approaching the subject with his gun out. And what he ended up doing, because the subject was not getting on the ground laying flat fast enough or to his liking, he took his foot and he stomped down on his back, which caused the subject to hit his head on the concrete, right? But what the subject is saying at the time was that he can't get down, right? He's an older male, you can tell, I believe he's 86 years old. Just from looking at him, you know he's old. And so, you know, have to take that in consideration as officers when we're looking at people who are elderly. They don't move the same way, right? And things of that nature. And he deliberately stomped down on him in order to try to flatten his body out on the concrete. That's problematic for a lot of different reasons. One, because that level of force that the officer used was excessive. It wasn't necessary, right? And here's the problem. In this job, in this profession as officers, and I tell people this all the time, this is a thinking profession. You cannot just get up and do this job. You have to be thinking, you have to be observant, you have to pay attention to everything. So before I get in any further, let's continue on with the video.
You're not listening, dude. had some. No, he was right here. Watch him. Go watch him. There it is. All right, that's what he had.
No gun.
All right, who's the complainant?
All right, so I'm gonna pause it there. Listen, okay, the officer doesn't find a gun. Okay, here's the 911 call. The complainant sees a male. I'm pretty sure the complainant said there's a black male outside walking around with a gun in their hand. So I don't know what the exact 911 call was, but the officer, as you see, as he pulls up first, let me step back. Let me step back. The problem with this is it's not against the law for a person to have a gun. As you have seen, people walk around and they carry guns over their shoulder. They walk around with guns in their hand. It's not against the law for a person to have a gun. Quite frankly, our Second Amendment gives us the right to carry a gun, right? Now, depending on what state you're in, they might have different concealed carry laws. You might have to have a permit for this, a permit for that. So it just depends, right? In Georgia, we have a unique law where if you want to conceal a weapon, you have to have a concealed permit. Outside of that, your gun just needs to be in a holster and it needs to be visible, right? We have these First Amendment auditors who walk around and they'll carry their guns on, their rifles slinged over their shoulder in public, right? And they exercise their Second Amendment right. It's not against the law to have a gun. It's against the law to commit a crime and use a gun, but to have one is not. So I have an issue with the officer's initial approach, right? His approach was on some Rambo cowboy type stuff, right? How would I have responded? I would have pulled up. I would have looked around. Hey, sir, how you doing? My name is so-and-so. Hey, we got a call about a person armed. Do you know anything about it? Are you do you have weapons on you? No. Okay. Do you mind if I pat you down? Whatever. You kind of go from there. The way the officer responded was as if he was responding to a shooting in progress, an armed robbery in progress, a burglary in progress, a rape in progress. That's the type of energy you bring when there's an in progress crime, violent crime taking place. He got out with his gun out and he's pointing it at people. The question is, does this situation justify the type of call that he was on? A person armed? No. We would get calls like this. Hey, a person's armed. They're walking around, blase, blase. And the supervisor would go and say, okay, well, what crime are they committing, right? They would ask the dispatcher, what crime is the person committing? What crime does the complainant, right, the witness, what are they seeing, right? Because just having a gun by itself is not good enough. So the question is, why was this level of approach used by this officer? I think it was unnecessary, and I think it was over the top. So I'm gonna continue on with the video. Let's see what else happens.
All right, get him up. 25 cents, got one tank.
Detained for what? The officer is making a big mistake. Now he's drifting into an area of a false arrest, right? As an officer, you're like, oh my God, now this guy didn't have a weapon at all. I've handcuffed him, right? He's not free to leave at this point, right? Essentially, he's under arrest. What are you investigating? There's no gun. You just pat him down. He doesn't have a weapon. You found he had a magic stick underneath the tire. No, at this point, he needs to be taken out of handcuffs.
Yep, they slammed my head down on the cement. Yep.
Go back inside. Go back in the house. Go back in the house. Ain't nobody talking to you.
I got head drunk.
Go back in the house.
Yep. Y'all bust my
Ego.
head down. Yeah, I've been in accident. Yeah, y'all bust my head down. You threw me down.
I sure did. You wasn't listening.
Yeah. No, it ain't. You ain't.
I sure did. You wasn't listening. See, this is an example of an officer who has an ego problem. Not only can he not acknowledge that he made a mistake, right? He's wrong, and he has this gentleman still in handcuffs after he realized that one, he doesn't have any weapons. Two, he didn't commit any crime at all. And then, out of sarcasm, he agrees and says, yeah, I did slam your head down. That's arrogance, you guys. That's ego. The dangerous thing about an ego is it has a very corruptive nature. It's just like power, right? It's very corruptive organically, because what happens is you never see it. You don't see it coming as an officer. You don't see it coming. And if you're not a very introspective person who takes the time to really look within self and recognize when you are having these ego trips, right? Then it consumes you. It consumes you, and you slowly start to become a different person. I've known officers who started off in the profession and they were very humble, they were very peaceful, they were very respectful. And then as they started to gain more experience, as they started dealing with people who surrender to them, right? Because this is what happens in law enforcement. The authority in this profession, if not careful, can feed your ego. How? How does that work, right? Your authority automatically puts you in a position of power, and people submit to that power, right? Naturally, people who are law-abiding, right? Even criminals, they see you, they committed a crime, and immediately they start to submit to that authority, right? Because that's the law. This is the social contract that we have, right? But what ends up happening to the officer? What happens to the officer in that moment? The officer's ego starts to be fed by their authority, right? Naturally, organically. And if an officer is not careful, what ends up happening is that they start to believe that they are the reason why people submit to their authority. They are the reason why a person is listening to them, right? And you start to, if you're not careful, thinking that you are bigger than the uniform that you wear, right? You start to think that your authority is equivalent to that of God's, right? In a sense, it's a God complex. The fact that this officer couldn't recognize that he made a mistake, that he couldn't even apologize. What does he do? He starts to use sarcasm against the victim, and even pokes fun at him. Yeah, I did slam your head. That's ego, you guys, and that's a very dangerous drug that is very corruptive in officers. Officers who suffer from a bad ego, their behavior starts to reflect that of arrogance, reflects that of a person who is extremely hubris and unable to be corrected or to be held accountable. And a lot of those officers become very oblivious in the profession. They lose themselves and can no longer recognize when they're actually the one who have made the mistake. So let's continue.
Just threw me down like that. I'm disability.
Okay.
I got the head problem. Yup. You threw me down. Yup. You threw me down. You threw me down.
I'll tell you what. That's for him.
You put my head down on the seat.
He was in front of the car when I came up. He was walking like this. And I thought it was a gun at first. I said, drop the gun, drop the gun, drop the gun, drop the gun. Had him at gunpoint. He's over here doing something like this.
You slam my head. Slam my
What
head
he was doing is
down
putting this up behind the tire. So he comes over right here. He got his hands in his pockets. I tell him, let me see your hands, let me see your hands, let me see
Why
your
you
hands.
bust my head?
He wasn't listening.
No, it ain't.
He got like this right here.
You grabbed me.
And we went on
And
the
then
ground.
you bust my head down on the cement. You bust my
Yeah,
fucking head.
your head did hit the cement.
Damn right. Could you fuck?
Two things that I noticed if you guys didn't pay attention. It's not an accurate description of what the officer stated. When the gentleman was coming from around the car, his hands were already raised, and he was walking towards the officer as the officer was yelling at him. So that's not accurate at all. Let's continue.
Bust me down on the cement.
Where's the complaint?
You bust my head down on the cement.
Why is he still in handcuffs?
Who called? I'm not sure. Take him out of cuffs
the use of force.
Yeah, no doubt. Yeah.
My head down.
Dude, I didn't know what his intention was.
Force. You need to look at camera.
So the supervisor told the officer, hey, get him out of handcuffs. We have no crime, right? The person who called the police is not even probably answering the phone. They're not answering the door. This happens a lot, you guys. You have complainants who will say they saw something, thought they saw something. They will call the police, and officers show up, and then they don't want to respond, or they don't want to give a statement or anything like that. You'll have complainants that will say certain things, and they're seeing what they want to see, and they don't give good descriptions on things. They just have a suspicion, and not to say that it's right or wrong, but just to say that they sometimes don't get it right. And so because of that, we have to make sure we get as much facts as possible before we show up, right? Jumping out the car with guns out, okay? Because a situation like this will happen, right? When you don't have good intel, you jump out the car and you pretend like you're in World War III.
Mayor, I'm gonna take that in the evidence of what he had. Well, I mean, that's the reasons I did what I did. You know what I'm saying? That's where I'm coming from.
So, what is the evidence of he didn't commit a crime?
Because when he was behind the truck, I couldn't see what he was doing, and I didn't know where
Ain't nothing there.
that went. If it was still in his pockets when he come around that car with his hands in his pockets.
These doors on. Yeah, my doors.
So the gentleman is saying, the victim is saying it's a dog stick. So I'm assuming he uses it maybe when he goes walking to swing around dogs. That's something a lot of elderly people will use, a stick or a cane. So that's not uncommon. At the same time, the officer says, hey, I want to put this in evidence. And the supervisor's like, for what? There's no crime. There's no crime. The only crime committed is by the officer. Listen, you guys, this is a profession where you have to be professional. This is a profession where you have to be good at your job. This is a profession where you can't afford to make mistakes. What you see, you need to be able to identify. Was that a weapon or was that a cell phone? You need to know, and you need to know before you pull your gun out and pull the trigger, right? Now, granted, let me rewind. Is there an issue with an officer having his gun out? No, but if you get it wrong, you need to apologize. Hey, I'm sorry. I've pointed my gun at people for situations that may have started off, right? Or you responding to something violent or a person that was armed. And hey, when the scene is safe, then you say, hey, I apologize. I have to do that. This is what happened. This is what was told to us. I'm really sorry. Let's, and let's go from there. This officer he never at one point apologized to this man. And that's one of the things I picked up too. But again, this is about professionalism. All right. This is about professionalism.
We don't have. They don't give us cars.
Okay, what's your badge number?
1059.
You see badge on my phone.
Hold on, we have cards.
You hear that? Look at that eye. Look at that look. Look at that look.
Right, he can get his stuff off the car.
All right, so that's the end of this first segment of the video. I'm going to take you guys to a second video showing us a different angle of the body cam. All right, and right there, he stomped on the victim's back. The victim hit his head on the concrete, and that was pretty much the incident. All right, you guys, so those are the two vantage points, the officer's body cam and then also his partner's body cam. You get a chance to see exactly what he did and the level of force that he used. And listen, again, I think this is so important that we have these conversations about accountability. What the officer did was inappropriate. It was excessive, and it was also unnecessary. Granted, I think what ends up happening is officers, we forget, right? Some of us forget and we lose control. And this is the problem with officers who respond off of emotion. One of the biggest problems is that you have some officers that are very, very sensitive. They're very sensitive and they're easily triggered emotionally, right? And they find it hard to separate their personal feelings from the actual job. The question is, why did the officer feel the need to use that level of force on that subject? There could be a lot of different reasons, but one of the things I will point out and just say that some officers have a hard time distinguishing between what's appropriate and what's not appropriate. Being able to use very good sound judgment in the heat of a moment is very crucial, and it's a skill, right? It's a trained, conscious skill to have, and unfortunately not everybody is that great at it, and that's just the truth. And it's not making an excuse. And I know a lot of times we want to look at situations and say race is a factor. I have to disagree sometimes, and this is why I'll disagree. Because I've seen black officers and I've known of black officers who have treated black people just the same or just as bad. And I call them out. I know other officers that have called them out. And what we saw in this case is officers, right, his partner actually stated and made a statement and said that yes, that force that he used was excessive, right? You had other officers at the scene who witnessed it and said, no, that's unacceptable. That's not appropriate, right? And held him accountable. And that's what makes this video a very powerful video. You guys, you may not see it and you don't hear about it, but officers do hold other officers accountable a lot of times. There are times they don't. There are times when you have multiple officers that are complicit on an excessive force type of case, and you never hear about it, right? Or we do hear about it, but that is not the norm. On average, the majority of the time, officers are holding other officers accountable. I'm saying that also speaking from experience, right? I've held officers accountable, and at the same time, I haven't been present when an officer has gone overboard, right? I'm talking overboard. I've been in situations where I've had to address an officer's aggression. I've had to address an officer's excessive charges, right? Might be charging someone excessively. I've had to address an officer's words of choice that they use against a suspect, right? Or a victim. So yeah, there are officers that do hold other officers accountable. You might not hear about it, right? It's not something that's popular to talk about, right? The news isn't gonna be like, hey, look, these officers are holding these officers accountable. Let's talk about it. Like, that's not something that happens in the media, right? It's when officers don't hold each other accountable that it makes mainstream media and people want to talk about it. Why? Because, it sells, right? But to be honest, you guys, we do hold each other accountable. You just don't hear about it. Officers lose their job all the time for doing things like this or similar to it, using excessive force. But when is that level of force justified, right? Like there's a thing that there's officers, we do use force that's justified. And to be honest with you, the law allows us to use reasonable force, right? The force has to match the situation, right? It has to match a level of resistance. Okay, so the question is, okay, what's the crime? Is this a robbery? Is this person armed? Is this person an immediate threat to the officer, right? Is this person using force against the officer or another person? Is this person resisting arrest? What type of crime is in progress, or what type of crime did this suspect commit? All these are factors that we have to take into account before we administer a level of force on a person. In this situation, a call that someone said a person was armed, it's not a crime. The initial response from the officer was already intense. He was already showing a level of aggression. He was already showing a level of force. Why? His approach, his voice. Our voice is a force. That is a force, right? It's a force of authority. He's yelling, he's shouting, he's pointing his weapon. That is a use of force within itself, right? Just showing and pointing your weapon is a sign of force to another person. And everybody complied. Everyone complied. The first male with the white shirt, he's like, who, me? He's like, who, me? Okay. And he got on the ground. The male who was injured and the burgundy shirt, he already walked out with his hands up. He said, I don't have a gun, which doesn't mean anything. Just because someone says they don't have a gun doesn't mean anything. But he complied. His hands weren't in his pocket. He got on the ground. All that yelling, all that shouting, you know? This is why people get upset, you guys. And this is why I understand. And this is why I don't get upset when people say, hey, some of these officers are too aggressive for no reason, right? The aggression doesn't match the circumstances. I get it. Unfortunately, as officers, what do we look at? We look at, oh, well, he could have had this, he could have did that. This is true. But as officers, we can still be alert. We can still be prepared without having to lose control of self. Because a lot of times when our emotions get involved, we're at a higher risk of making mistakes. And so that's one of the things I would point out with that. I felt the officer really failed at. And it's not a good look. It's not only that, the officer really displayed that he had an ego problem. Because even in the moment when he realized and recognized he was wrong, he couldn't even apologize, right? And then he used sarcasm against the person that he injured. And that's not what we're here for. It's not what we're here for. And it's officers like that that give other officers a bad name, and even white officers. Because now that gentleman has an experience with a white police officer. And in his mind, he's thinking to himself probably like, hey, this white officer was racist and look what he did to me. That's my thoughts, you guys. Let me know your thoughts in the comment section. I hope you found this video and this breakdown valuable. I'm curious to know what you think. Do you think this officer was racist? Do you think that he doesn't like black people, right? I know that's one of the common things that we like to talk about when we see situations where it's a white officer involving a black person. And though I'm not saying that there's no racist police officers that exist in this country, but I do like to steer away from a narrative and look at, hey, there are other issues outside of race that make officers bad officers, right? You can have a white officer that's not a racist and would have probably done the exact same thing, right? So it's not always about race, because I've seen black officers treat black people the same way. The question is it okay for a black officer but not okay for a white officer, right? The reality is there's an issue with officers who don't know how to do their job properly, right? And I always like to say, let's start there. My linear way of thinking starts off with looking at the facts, looking at the evidence, and then let's look at the morality, and then let's discuss the race, all right? And that way, it allows us to really look at something with logic and rational thinking before using emotion to dictate what we're seeing. So anyways, you guys, let me know your thoughts in the comment section. I'm curious to know what you guys think. In conclusion, what happened to the officer? He was fired 2 days later. That's what you call accountability. Not only was he fired, he was also charged with felony assault. You know, and I'm pretty sure that gentleman is going to sue the police department. You know, so this is a reminder as officers that we have to, one, know the law, understand it, and we have to make good, sound judgment. And we can't allow our emotions to get ahead of us. We can't let our egos dictate our actions and our behaviors towards others. And so those are my thoughts. You guys, appreciate you taking the time to watch this. To my new subscribers, welcome again. And with that, I'm out. Good night. God bless.